Well, Matt, this is a question I wanted to ask it to you. Is the U.S. response is, I think, intentionally unclear, because one of the big mistakes we've made, I think, and I think a lot of people agree on this, is taking everything off the table before we need to. The Biden administration did a brilliant job saying this invasion was coming, and a horrible job saying we're not going to do anything about it militarily, because even if that's never the intention, I think it's much better to have that ability than to, take it off the table, keep people guessing. I think they're starting to get more cagey on that, because on the chemical weapons front, President Biden said, we will respond in kind. This could be from finally cutting off all Russian oil and gas. I think morally, the Russians need to understand that economically they're really done if they start crossing some of these red lines on well, I'm not going to call it red lines on our side because we don't seem to have any, but if they start crossing the Rubicon with chemical and nuclear, they're basically becoming even more of a pariah than they already are. I think it's hard for a lot of the world to stay neutral, or at least openly stay neutral in that case. And they could well have, maybe if it's not the United States, it's Britain that just pops up and lobs a nuke themselves or something to send a message. And they're a NATO member, which obviously creates the Article 5 treaty if Britain gets hit or threatened by Russia. So where do you think the countermeasures go, and what's the right policy? This is impossible to say, but where do you think the thinking is at on our side?
Yeah, I'll say very quickly, at least, that I think you're 100% right that one of the things we certainly got right from an intelligence perspective was, sounding the alarm that this was going to happen. One of the things I think we got wrong was the view of the Russian ability and their ability to take on Ukraine. I think that it's fairly clear that even our own understanding of Ukraine's ability to defend itself was not accurate either. So I think those two inaccurate conclusions that we drew from an intelligence perspective on their each respective capabilities, I think that really hampered us at the very beginning from moving more weapons into Ukraine. I think that's one reason we didn't, because I think in the American government, they assumed that Ukraine would fall fairly quickly. In the first couple days of the war, President Zelensky was offered a way out, and he famously said, I need ammo, not a ride, for example. So I think that from that perspective, that kind of hampered us to begin with. I think now we are getting, we are doing a far better job moving weapons and equipment into Ukraine to help them defend themselves. The policy in DC, though, at the moment seems to be coming out of the White House of let the Ukrainians bleed the Russians until the Russians themselves choose to move out. That seems to be what the plan is at the moment. They have been fairly successful. At least the White House has been fairly accurate in that assessment that, the Ukrainians were able to get the Russians out of the Kyiv region. We'll see if they're able to do it out of the eastern portion of Ukraine. They're doing a great job so far, and they need the heavier weapons to actually physically push the Russians out at this point.
So you don't see the Americans doing anything in response, or NATO, or you think it's deliberately ambiguous on a response to a tactical nuke?
So if the Russians were to use nuclear weapons, then it really is kind of a brave new world at that point, since there haven't been the usage of nuclear weapons in a live combat area since the Second World War. So especially since the Russians have very tiny nuclear weapons, I think what would probably happen, at least initially, is we would see a cutoff of SWIFT, for example, for the Russians, and I think that NATO in particular and the European Union would shut down as much trade as possible, including the Russian the importation of Russian energy into the EU. It really would not be tenable at that point anymore for them to do that. So I think that's what would be the initial reaction, and whether or not nuclear weapons would be used in response, it goes back to my earlier response of it is a political decision at that point. And the Biden White House has certainly been very reticent to get too terribly involved in these things. Boris Johnson over in the UK has been far more gung-ho, if you will. That goes back for historical reasons to a certain extent, since the Russians and the British have always kind of interfered in each other to a certain extent. But that's essentially what we're looking at if the Russians were to use nuclear weapons.